Bruchim haboyim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Dalid Amud Aleph at the very top. The Gemara explained, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that our Mishnah that says the Kohen Gadol must be sequestered, separated 7 days before his Avodah on Yom Kippurim is learned out from the Miluim, just as Aaron Ubanov, who were separated for 7 days in the oil moed before they did their avodas hakarbonos on the 8th day of the miluim. That is then the precedent for the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippurim. The Mishnah states that the Kohen who is soref the para aduma is also separated 7 days beforehand. That he says a maila ba'alma, in order to then be careful to show the care and heightened level of strictness of the purity that we must go through. Therefore, we then separate the kohen hasaref 7 days before the paraduma. But it's a maila ba'alma. It's not learned out from the miluim. Reish Lakish, who argues on Rabbi Yochanan, says we learn out that the kohen gadol is separated 7 days before his avodah of the Yom Kippurim, as well as indeed the precedent that the Kohen HaSaref is separated 7 days before then the burning of the Kohen of the Paraduma. That is learned out from Sinai, just as Moshe Rabbeinu was covered by the Anan, by the cloud, for 6 days, and then on the 7th day HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him the Luchos and the Torah. So too over here, the Mishnah states 7 days. In our Mishnah, it states 7 days. That's as a heightened precaution. Like the Tana, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, that once we have the requirement of a chashash, or let's say like this, once we have the requirement that there's 6 days of separation by Sinai, thereby we'll also then add a 7th day, because we're concerned maybe the Kohen Gadol perhaps was with his wife, and she was then determined to be a nida, whereby he himself would have been tamei for 7 days, passing him from the avodah. So therefore we say he has to separate not just for 6 days, for 7 days too. The Gemara now brings Omar Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, Bishlama ledidi the alfina mimiluim. According to me, Rabbi Yochanan says, who learns out from miluim that the Kohen Gadol is separated 7 days before his avodah on Yom Kippurim. Hainu detanya. That's what's meant by the brayso. Ze v'ze mazin alav kol shiva mikol chato shahayu shom. That's what's meant by the brayso that's quoted in its entirety later on in the Amud. That both this and that, both the Kohen Gadol before Yom HaKippurim and the Kohen HaSaref before he served the Parah Aduma, must be sprinkled these 7 days from the Mechatos of the Parah Aduma. Because we have a precedent from the Miluim. By Miluim there was also the sprinkling on Aaron Ubanov during the 7 days while they were sequestered in the oil moed. But you, Reish Lakish, who learns out from Sinai, Hazah b'Sinai mi havoi. There was no such thing as Hazah b'Sinai. Or Marlei, Reish Lakish responds, Uletaimech minecha. According to your reasoning, Rabbi Yochanan, is it still very good to learn out from Miluim? B'Miluim dam hocha mayim. In Miluim, Aaron and Bonov was sprinkled with the dam of the korbanos. But in regards to the case of the Kohen Gadol, he is sprinkled, as well as the Kohen who is Saref, he is sprinkled, or they are sprinkled, with the Mechatos, with the water. Gemara says, Halokasha, that's not difficult. Reish Lakish responds, the Tani Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yochanan responds, the Tani Rabbi Chia, Nichnesu Mayim Tachas Dam. As Rabbi Chia taught from the brayso that's going to be quoted, that indeed the mayim was replacing the dam of the korbanos. Although it's true by the miluim, it was the dam of the korbanos that was sprinkled on Aaron Ubanov. But once there was a paradum which was done, which was really the original one, was burned and made the second day, and therefore the ashes of the paradum were used for the mechatas from then onwards, that replaced then the sprinkling of the dam. But again, Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, where do we find that there was hazah sprinkling at Har Sinai? That there should be a sprinkling also when it comes to the Kohanim, in the case of Yom Kippurim and the Kohen Hasarif by Paraduma, Amar Lei Maila Ba'alma. So Reish Lakish's response is that en Hanami, there's no requirement that the Kohen Gadol be sprinkled 7 days before his avodah on Yom Kippurim. It's a Maila Ba'alma, just like it's a Maila Ba'alma to have anyways the Kohen to be separated 7 days before the Paraduma, as you yourself admit, Rabbi Yochanan. So too, it's a Maila Ba'alma to then sprinkle the Kohen Gadol on the 7 days before Yom Kippurim. Gemara says, Tanya Kavose de Rabbi Yochanan, Tanya Kavose de Reish Lakish. We have a brisa both like Rabbi Yochanan, who learns out from Miluim, as well as a brisa that supports Reish Lakish that learns out from Sinai. Tanya Kavose de Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan, who learns out from Miluim. The pasuk states, "Bezois Yavoy Aaron El HaKodesh." With this, Aaron will come to the Kodesh, to come to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Bepar ben Bokar Lechatus Va'ila Oilo. So the Gemara makes a drasha. Bezois Yavoy Aaron El HaKodesh. Now the Pashup Pshat is, with this, meaning with this korban of the chatas and the oila having been performed, then Aaron will enter the Kodesh Kadoshim on Yom Kippurim. Bamesha omu be'inyan. Bezois come to say on this that the Torah was mentioning earlier on. That's what Aaron will then enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim with. Explains the Gemara, my he be'inyan. What is this that the Torah had mentioned? The miluim is referring to the miluim. Since the Torah just before stated, Acharei mois shtei bonov shel Aharon, then it says with this, referring to that, the miluim itself, Yavoy Aaron el HaKodesh. That means that Aaron will then enter the Kodesh, having been sequestered for 7 days before entering the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Uma omor be'inin hamiluim. What's mentioned in regards to the miluim? As we just said, Aaron pivet shiva v'shimesh yom echad. He separated 7 days and then served for 1 day. U'Moshe Mosar loy kol shiva kedei lechanchoy ba'avoda. And Moshe, he transmitted the laws to Aaron during those 7 days in order to mechanech him in the avodah he will perform on the 8th day of the miluim. V'af ledoros kohen gadol pirash shiva u'meshamish yom echad. So too the kohen gadol before Yom Kippurim separates 7 days and then serves the 8th day on Yom Kippurim. U'shnei talmidei chachamim mitalmidav shel Moshe la'pukei tzedoikin moisin loy kol shiva kedei lechancha be'avodah. And 2 talmidei chachamim teach the kohen gadol the laws during those 7 days, that he will then perform the avodah on the 8th day, Yom Kippurim. The Brisa continues, Bikan Amru, from here the Mishnah states, Shivas Yomim Kohen Yom Kippurim Mafrishin Kohen Gadol Mi Beiso Lelishkas Parhedrin. That's what our Mishnah states, that 7 days before Yom Kippurim, we separate the Kohen Gadol and put him in the Lishkas of the Parhedrin. Kishem shemafrishin kohen gadol, kach mafrishin kohen hasarif es hapor lelishka shal pnei habiro tzvoina mizracha. The Brisa continues and says, the same way that we separate the kohen gadol 7 days before Yom Kippurim, similarly we also separate the kohen hasarif, who's going to be sarif the parah 7 days before that procedure, and we put him in the lishka, in the Pnei Abira Tzfoina, the northeastern part of the Azara. Even though it's not the same limud, it's true. According to Rabbi Yochanan, this limud, of course, as the Brisa is saying, is a limud from Miluim to Yom Kippurim, and whereby the Kohen HaSoref is a Maila Ba'alma. The Brisa continues, Ve'echad ze ve'echad ze meizin alov kol shiva mikol chato shahayushom. As we saw before, the Brisa says, and both this and that, the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippurim, as well as the Kohen HaSoref before the Sreifas Paraduma, each one is sprinkled during those 7 days with the mechatois. V'im toimar b'miluim dom. And if you'll say, the Brisa continues, that in the miluim, the sprinkling was done with the dam of the karbonos, and over here it's different when it comes to these two, we're sprinkling them with the mayim, hacha b'mayim, amris nichnesu mayim tachas dam. I'll answer you that in place of the dam, once there was a paraduma, which was then put into place the second day, right after the day after the miluim, the 8th day of the miluim, on Beis Nisan, then that then was in place of the dam to use for the sprinkling. The Brisa continues, V'oimer, Kasher osa b'yom hazeh tziva Hashem la'asos l'chaper aleichem. The Brisa concludes by bringing the pasuk in regards to the miluim. It says in the miluim, Kasher osa b'yom hazeh, just as he performed on this day, referring to Aaron Ubanov, on the day of the 8th day of the Miluim, which had 7 days preceding it, of sequestering them. Tziva Hashem la'asos l'chaper aleichem Eilu Maaseh Yom Kippurim. This is the gears of the Rishonim, including Tosfos on Dibra Maskil Dirabeh on Gimel Amud Beis. Al Kopanim, that comes to say in the Brisa, that concludes that the Miluim, we learn out from there that indeed, just as Aaron Ubanov were sequestered 7 days before the 8th day of the Avodah, so too the Kohen Gadol was separated 7 days before his Avodah on Yom Kippurim. Says the Gemara now, V'hai bezois, beginning with the Brisa, in the first part of the Brisa, Mi boy le legufei, when it says Bazois Yovai Aaron el HaKodesh. So l'chara, like we said, the Pasha Pshat is that we need the word bezois to see that Aaron will enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim after he brings these karbonos, which is mentioned in the pasuk, Par ben Bokar lechatis v'ayil la'oila. The Par ben Bokar lechatis v'ayil la'oila. Ask the Gemara. Omrei, the Gemara says, no, we can make a drasha from bezois. Why? Because if it was only to teach me that he has to enter the Kodesh HaKodashim after bringing the carbon, and that's alone what it's coming to say, then it should say zeh in the masculine form, because we're talking about an ayil and a bokar, which is masculine. Or you should say be'ele with these, which is plural. My bezois. Why does it say in the feminine bezois? Shamas mina tarti comes to teach me two things. That aleph, it's referring kipshutoi, like the karbonos he has to enter with after bringing the karbonos to the Kodesh Kadoshim, and also he has to enter with the fact that he was sequestered 7 days beforehand, as we learned from the Miluim. Mai ve'oimer. Now the Gemara asks, why does the end of the Brisa bring ve'oimer, bringing the Miluim again? We already learned from Bezois a drasha teaching me from the Miluim. Why does then the Brisa conclude with the pasuk in regards to the Miluim, that just as Aaron himself performed the Miluim the 8th day, after having been sequestered for 7 days, so too then that will be also a tzivui for Daros, that the Kohen will be separated for 7 days before Yom HaKippurim. Answers the Gemara, Yom HaKippurim kamohu deboy prisha. If you'll say it's only the first Yom HaKippurim in history that required prisha, and that's what Bezois is teaching me, then Kidash Kochan Beit Miluim, as we find by Miluim, Avam Yom HaKim da Amaloi, but we don't do that in any other Yom HaKippurim subsequently. Inami, or alternatively, you'll say Kohen Gadol kamohu deboy prisha. The very first Kohen Gadol, he required prisha. Aval Kohen Gadol ba'al maloi, but all subsequent Kohen Gadols do not require prisha before Yom Kippurim. Toshma, for that, the end of the Brisa brings the pasuk of Miluim. Kasher also, it's going to be for Daros, just like by Miluim, there was 7 days of sequestering, Arnubanov, before the 8th day of the Avodah, on the 8th day of Miluim. So too, for all generations, the Kohen Gadol must be separated 7 days before Yom Kippurim. Now the Gemara brings a brisa that supports Reish Lakish. Tanya Kavasi de Reish Lakish. There's a brisa that supports Reish Lakish's opinion that we learn out that the Kohen Gadol is separated 7 days before Yom Kippurim from Sinai. As follows: Moshe Allah ba'onan. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu, he went up in the cloud. V'niskase ba'onan. He was covered by the cloud. V'niskadesh ba'onan, and he was sanctified by the cloud. Kidei lekabel Torah liyisrael b'kedusha, in order to receive the Torah with kedusha. Shneimar says vayishkoin kavod Hashem al Har Sinai, that Hashem's glory rested on Har Sinai. Ze haya ma'ase achar aseres hadibros shayu tchila 40 yom divrei Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. You can explain this pasuk vayishkoin kavod Hashem al Har Sinai. You can explain that all of this that we're saying that the clouds covered, so you can say that it covered the mountain beginning from Rosh Chodesh Sivan. In which case, when it covered the mountain, it didn't cover Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu was going up and going down from the mountain during the entire week before the giving of the Torah. And therefore, Rabbi Yossi HaGlili says that's not the understanding of the pasuk. The understanding of the pasuk is that it was after the giving of the luchos, and therefore it was a covering. The Anan covered actually Moshe in order to then sequester him, prior to then giving him the Torah, the rest of the Torah, or the giving the actual luchos themselves. But it was after the ma'isa of the dibros of the Aseret Hadibros that were stated, and therefore this really is the ultimate proof and support that Reish Lakish has that indeed there's sequestering of 6 days before the giving of the Torah, of the giving of the luchos. The Brisa continues. Rabbi Akiva is choylek on Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, and it says it is from Rosh Chodesh, and therefore you have no proof that there was a sequestering of Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayishkan kvod Hashem me Rosh Chodesh. It happened from Rosh Chodesh. On top of David Lamed Beis. When it says Vayichaseu Anan, the pasuk that the Anan, the cloud, covered him, it was referring to not him, but it, Lahar, to the mountain. It covered the mountain, not Moshe. Vayikro El Moshe, the pasuk goes on to say, and the Shekhinah called out to Moshe. What does that mean? Moshe v'kol Yisrael. Really, Moshe was standing with all of the people. And therefore, why did they call out to Moshe? It was only to then give glory, to give kavod to Moshe Rabbeinu. But indeed, it wasn't coming to then only cover Moshe, really, and covered the entire mountain. And Moshe was coming up and down from the Har, from Rosh Chodesh on. So we have no raya that you require sequestering beforehand. Indeed, over there, it wasn't sequestering, even by Har Sinai. That's how Rabbi Akiva maintains. Rabbi Nosson Omer. Rabbi Nosson is a third opinion in the Brisa. He also learns Rabbi Yossi HaGlili that indeed Moshe Rabbeinu was sequestered, but it's not going to be a limud for daros. It was just then. Why? He explains. Lo ba kaza ela lemarek achila v'shtia shebemeyav lasumoi kimalachi ashares. All of this sequestering of Moshe Rabbeinu is only to then clean out the intestines of Moshe Rabbeinu from food and drink, that he should be considered like the Malachi Hashares, when he's going to then be in the mountains on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Rab Masi ben Choresh Oimer, he is the fourth opinion of the Brisa, and he also holds like Rabbi Yossi HaGlili that indeed Moshe Rabbeinu was sequestered after the giving of the Aseret Hadibros. But again, it wasn't a limud for daros; it was just for a particular time then when he received the Torah itself, the Luchos itself. Lo ba kasav elo la'ayem alav, only to then cause to frighten Moshe Rabbeinu. Kidei shetei Torah nitenes be'emo beretes uvizia, that the Torah should be given with fear, with trepidation, and with trembling. Shneimar, as it says, Ivdu es Hashem b'yira v'gilul b'yirada. You shall serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with, it says, yira, with fear, and you should be joyful with trembling. Ask the Gemara, what are these things that seem to be contradictory? My gilu bira'oda, what does it mean to be joyful with trembling? Answers the Gemara to explain, Amarav Ade Bar Masna Amarav, B'mokom Gila Shom Tehei Ra'oda. In the place of Gila, the excitement, the joy of the Torah, there has to be trembling.